I woke up as the lord of a cursed sky island, the worst territory in the Vale clan, filled with starving, resentful citizens who hated their weak leader. But I had a storage ability that could preserve anything forever, and this massive broken land was the perfect canvas. I would transform this dying territory into the most powerful domain in the shattered heavens, no matter how many doubted me. But that conviction came later. First, there was the cold. Stone pressed against my spine like frozen teeth. My lungs dragged in air that tasted wrong, thin, metallic, carrying the distant scent of something rotting. I gasped awake with memories fragmenting behind my eyes. Ring lights, a camera, the familiar hum of my streaming setup. Then falling. The sensation of my chair tilting backward, my head cracking against something hard. And then, nothing. I tried to sit up. My arm shook, not from impact, but from weakness so profound that lifting my own weight felt like bench pressing a car. These were my arms. Too thin, calloused in places mine had never been. The bones jutted wrong beneath skin that had weathered winds I'd never felt. A groan escaped lips that weren't mine. Where the hell was I? The room, if you could call it that, was a study in despair. Cracked stone walls. A ceiling that sagged in the corners. Gaps in a mortar where wind whistled through like the building itself was breathing its last. Through a window without glass, I could see sky. Only sky. No hiraisen. No ground. Just endless blue stretching in every direction, and below it, nothing. The bottomless blue, some fragment of memory whispered, where nothing returns. I was on a floating island. The knowledge settled into my stolen bones with a certainty I couldn't explain. My legs buckled twice before I managed to stand. There was a basin in the corner, cracked down the middle, holding maybe 2 fingers of murky water. I dragged myself toward it. Looked down. The face staring back wasn't mine. Wind-weathered skin stretched over cheekbones sharp enough to cut. Hollow cheeks. Eyes that had seen too much failure and stopped hoping for anything better. This was a man who had given up. I could see it in the slack of his jaw, the emptiness behind his gaze. He'd been waiting to die. Memories crashed through me like waves. A grand hall. Silk banners bearing the Vale crest. Faces arranged in judgment. Elders with calculating eyes. Warriors who smelled blood in the water. And standing at the center, broad-shouldered and well-fed. A man whose smile never reached his cold eyes. Vusungval. My brother. Our dear Heron has failed the clan's most basic duty, he announced to the assembly. 5 years of marriage, and he produces only a daughter. No heir, no future. The bloodline ends with him. The elders nodded. Of course they did. Sons were everything in this world. Daughters were footnotes. But we are merciful, Wuzing continued, and the word dripped from his tongue like poison. We grant him the hollow march. Let him prove his worth there, or quietly fade from our concern. The hollow march. Even through fragmented memories, I understood what that meant. The cursed territory, the dying domain, a landmass so vast it could support 10 times its population, if only its resource nodes weren't depleted, its infrastructure crumbling, its wind barriers failing. Previous lords had tried and failed. Most hadn't tried at all. They sent Heron here to die. They sent me here to disappear. A sound from the inner room snapped me back to the present. I moved toward it on legs that trembled with each step. The doorway had no door, just a rotting curtain that crumbled when I pushed it aside. Inside, pressed against the wall like she was trying to melt through it, was a woman. Suinli, my wife. The previous Heron's wife. She was beautiful once. I could see the ghost of it in her bone structure, the elegance of her features. But starvation had carved away everything soft, leaving only sharp angles and sunken eyes. She looked up at me without hope. Heron, her voice cracked. Did you find anything? Beside her, curled into a ball small enough to break my heart, was a child. 5 years old. Bakwa, my daughter. Her ribs showed through clothes too thin for the constant wind. She clutched a doll made of rope scraps, and at her feet lay the saddest creature I'd ever seen. A driftling pup, they called it. Gomi. Its wing membranes were underdeveloped, its body trembling with hunger. A runt thrown away by another territory. Just like us. I checked the storage room. 3 withered tubers. A handful of seeds. Water for maybe 2 days. The previous heron had stopped trying. He'd laid down on that cold stone and waited for the end to come. His wife knew it. His daughter knew it. The whole damn territory probably knew it. But I wasn't heron. I was a survival streamer who'd spent 7 years in Earth's harshest wilderness. I'd eaten grubs in the Amazon. I'd made water filters from charcoal and sand. I'd tracked predators through terrain that wanted me dead and walked out the other side with footage worth millions of views. And more than that, I could feel something in my chest. A power. When I focused, space seemed to fold around my will. I reached out mentally, and a small pocket of nothing opened. Dimensional storage. Items could enter. Items could stay. Forever. Without decay. 3 tubers went in. They'd keep until I needed them. This wasn't a prison. This was a canvas. Bake was stirred. Her enormous eyes found mine. Desperate, searching, afraid to hope. Papa, are you okay now? Something hardened in my chest. Not despair. Not the weakness of the man who'd owned this body before. Cold calculation. Absolute refusal. I knelt before her. Touched her thin face with hands that were finally mine. I'm okay now, I said. And meant it. I stood and walked to the cliff edge. Beyond the hollow march's crumbling boundaries, shapes circled in the wind shears. Flying beasts. Dangerous. Valuable. Meat that could be stored forever. Hides that could keep my daughter warm. The old heron would have cowered. The old heron would have watched his family starve. I would hunt them. I would master this broken territory. I would transform this cursed domain into something that would make Woozing Vale choke on his contempt. The wind howled across the hollow march. I smiled. The morning light fell pale and thin across the hollow march, filtering through clouds that hung low over the territory like a burial shroud. I had already been awake for hours. Sleep came in fragments now. My mind refused to quiet itself when there was so much to learn, so much to understand about this broken land that was somehow mine. I crawled on my belly along the eastern edge of the island, where the rock grew smooth and treacherous from centuries of wind erosion. My fingers found purchase in cracks no wider than a coin. My breath came slow and measured. One wrong shift of weight, one moment of inattention, and the wind shears would claim me. They'd find pieces of my body scattered across 3 different altitude layers, if they found anything at all. But I wasn't here to die. I was here to learn. My breath sense, still weak, still new to me, pulsed faintly in my chest. As I pressed myself flat against the stone, the wind didn't just blow here. It spoke. It told stories in the language of pressure differentials and thermal columns. The old heron had never learned to listen. The man I was now had no choice. There, a pocket of calmer air, sheltered by a jutting formation of dark basalt. The wind curved around it rather than through it. A hunting blind, if I could reach it. And beyond that formation, the wind shears proper began, visible, as rippling distortions in the air itself, screaming gusts that moved fast enough to strip flesh from bone. I marked the location in my memory. Then I began cataloging everything else I could see. Wind-smoothed stones, dozens of them, perfect weights for throwing lines or primitive bolus. Fibrous sky root, vines growing from cracks in the rock face, tough enough to serve as cordage if properly treated. A narrow ridge extending toward the wind shear zone like a finger pointing at the circling shapes beyond. Those shapes, the beasts. I counted 7 of them riding the thermals. Most kept their distance, instincts warning them away from the island's boundaries. But they were there. Meat, hide, bone, resources that never had to spoil if I could bring them back and store them properly. The thought sent something warm through my chest. Not excitement. Certainty. I made my way back to the hut. As the sun climbed higher, every muscle in my body ached from the crawl. But I'd gathered 3 armfuls of sky root vines and a collection of stones that would serve my purpose. When I pushed through the ragged curtain that served. As our door, Bakewell was awake and watching. Suinli sat beside her, one thin arm wrapped around our daughter's shoulders. I divided our remaining rations carefully. A third for Suinli. A third for Bakwa, the smallest portion for myself, enough to keep me functional, nothing more. They needed the strength more than I did. I'm going to the island's edge, I said. The outer edge, past the shelter zones. There are wind-blown seeds that collect in the rock formations there. I need to scout the hunting grounds. Sunli's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Her fingers trembled, but her grip was iron. 3 islanders died, trying to reach those edges. Her voice was hoarse. Guangho, the merchant's son, old Yom's wife. The wind shears took them all. They never found the bodies. I know the risks. Do you? She pulled me closer, her eyes searching my face. You're different. Since yesterday, you're different. I don't understand it, and right now, I don't care. But if you die out there, we die in here. Our daughter dies. She held my gaze for a long moment, and I saw something else flickering behind the fear. The villagers are watching you, she said quietly. The scattered ones, the ones who still eke out survival in the outer settlements. Word travels on the wind in the hollow march. They know you walked to the cliff edge yesterday and came back. Some of them are hoping. Most of them think you're a fool who'll be dead by sundown. And you, the ghost of a smile, touched her cracked lips. I think you're going to prove them wrong. But I'm terrified that I'm wrong too. I covered her hand with mine, squeezed once. Then I turned to the corner of the hut where I'd laid out my gathered materials and began to work. The stone scraper came first, a flat piece of obsidian-like rock that I chipped into a cutting edge using techniques I'd learned for a survival stream 3 years ago. Lifetime ago. Different world ago. The vine rope took longer, twisting and braiding the fibrous strands until they held together under tension. Finally, I assembled a weighted line, stones wrapped in vine, designed to test wind force before I committed my body. Bakwa watched everything with enormous eyes. When I stood to leave, she scrambled across the floor and tugged at my sleeve. In her hands was the rope doll, the one she'd been clutching yesterday, the only toy she possessed. For luck, she whispered. Bring it back, Papa, and come back with it. I knelt before her, took the doll carefully and tucked it inside my robe, against my chest where it would stay secure. I'll bring it back, I promised, and I'll bring back more. In the corner, Gomi's ears twitched. The driftling's eyes had gone distant, unfocused, its breath sense reaching out toward the beast that circled beyond our territory's edge. It knew they were there. It could feel them. I paused at the doorway, and suddenly I understood something that had been nagging at me since yesterday. The sense of expansion in my chest. The impossible certainty that I could carry more than my arms could hold. I focused inward, and I felt it. A void. A pocket of nothing that existed somewhere behind my sternum, connected to my will. I reached for a loose stone on the ground and thought about storing it, and the stone simply vanished. Not into my hands, not into my robe, but into elsewhere. Void storage. A spatial gift. The ability to carry resources without weight, without spoilage, without limit. I retrieved the stone with a thought. It appeared in my palm, unchanged. This was it. This was how I would feed my people. I stepped out into the pale morning light and began walking toward the cliff paths. Behind me, I didn't see Bakwa's face pressed against the gap in the curtain. I didn't hear her whispered words to Gomi. Papa might not come back. He might not come back, and then we'll be alone again. The driftling pressed closer to her, and together they watched me disappear toward the screaming edges of our dying world. The path to the outer cliffs took me through terrain that wanted me dead. Loose scree that shifted underfoot. Wind channels that came from nowhere and shoved me sideways toward drops that had no bottom. I moved slowly, testing every step, using the weighted line to gauge air pressure before committing my weight. And then I reached the transition zone. The wind changed here. It stopped being weather and became something alive, something hungry. I felt it pressing against me from 3 directions at once, trying to find the angle that would pry me loose and send me tumbling into the bottomless blue. But I braced myself against the rock formation I'd spotted earlier, the natural blind that curved the worst of the shears around rather than through. And from here, I could finally see them clearly. The beasts. 7 massive shapes riding the thermals beyond the island's edge. Galetolons, I recognized from inherited memories, predators built for the wind, with wingspans twice my height and talons that could punch through stone. 6 of them flew perfect spirals, untouchable, unreachable. But the 7th, its flight pattern was wrong, uneven. One wing dipped lower than the other, and each beat came with a visible tremor. Wounded, weak, vulnerable. My heart hammered. My hands tightened on the rock. And then I felt something else, something deeper. The hollow march itself. The territory responded to my presence, to my intent. A faint resonance hummed through the stone beneath my palms, through the wind that screamed past my face. The land was watching me, testing me. Its power stirred against my own, ancient and vast and hungry for a lord worthy of claiming it. I looked at the wounded Galetolon. I looked at the screaming wind between us, and I began a plan. The wounded Galetolon favored its left wing on every third stroke. I counted the pattern 17 times before I was certain. 17 beats, 17 dips, 17 moments where the creature's flight path became predictable. Its membrane was torn. I could see the ragged edge catching light when it banked toward the sun. A territorial dispute, probably. These things fought constantly over nesting rights in the screaming winds, and the losers either died or descended to the calm belt to hunt easier prey. This one had descended, and now it was trapped, not by cage or chain, but by physics, by the simple, brutal math of damaged flight mechanics. It couldn't generate enough lift to return to the upper winds, so it compensated by riding the thermal currents that spiraled around the hollow march's eastern outcroppings. The same route, over and over. A wounded predator locked into a pattern it couldn't break. I pressed my chest flat against the stone and watched it land. There, a narrow shelf jutting from the island's underside like a broken tooth. The Galetolon touched down heavily, talons scraping furrows in the rock. It rested there for perhaps 30 seconds before launching again, circling, hunting, returning to the same perch. 30 seconds. That was enough. My hands are already moving, harvesting vines from the crevices around me. Not the thin ones I'd been testing earlier. These needed to hold weight. Real weight. I found a thick cable of growth anchored deep in a crack, tested it with my full body weight, fell to hold. Good. I began constructing the trap in my mind, calculating anchor points and trigger mechanisms, visualizing how the snare would deploy when pressure hit the rock shelf. The mathematics of predation. I'd build traps like this 100 times in my old life, for content, for survival demonstrations, for the satisfaction of solving a puzzle with stakes. But never like this. Never when the drop below me fell forever. Never when failure meant my daughter would grow up without a father in a territory that would swallow her whole. I worked my way along the cliff face, testing each handhold before committing my weight. The wind screamed past my ears, tried to pry my fingers from the stone, failed. I found another anchor point and began securing the first loop of vine. And then I felt it, the hollow march. The territory's presence pressed against my awareness like a vast, sleeping thing stirring in its dreams. Stone shifted beneath my palm, not falling, not crumbling, but settling, becoming more stable. A wind current that had been shoving at my back suddenly parted, flowing around me instead of through me. The land was helping, but I could feel the cost of that help burning through me. My reserves, whatever mysterious energy fueled territory attunement, were draining with every adjustment the hollow march made on my behalf. I was running on fumes, and the more I demanded, the faster those fumes burned away. I need to conserve, I told myself. Build the trap, kill the beast, store the meat, get home, one step at a time. I found a third anchor point and was testing its stability when I heard the sound. A child cry. The wind carried it like a blade to my heart. I spun, nearly lost my grip, and my blood turned to ice in my veins. Bakwa was 50 meters behind me, clinging to the rock face with fingers that had gone white from pressure. Her small body trembled against the gusts that tore at her ragged clothes. Gomi was pressed against her chest, the driftling's wings wrapped around her neck like a living scarf. She followed me. My daughter had followed me across unstable terrain, through screaming winds, to the edge of the hollow march's most dangerous hunting ground. And the ledge beneath her feet was crumbling. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I abandoned my careful positioning and sprinted. The wind hit me like a fist. It caught my chest, my legs, tried to spin me out into the endless blue. I dropped low, used my hands. As much as my feet scrambled across rock that cracked and shifted with every step. A gust nearly lifted me. I grabbed a jutting stone and held on until it passed. Behind me, I heard Bakwa scream. The ledge broke. I covered the last 10 meters in what felt like a single heartbeat, my hand closing around her tiny wrist just as the stone beneath her gave way completely. I hauled her against my chest, and we both pressed flat to the cliff face as fragments tumbled past us, falling, gone forever into the bottomless blue. Bakwa sobbed into my shoulder, her body shaking so hard I thought she might shake apart. I held her tight, pressed my face in her tangled hair, and tried to breathe. She was alive. She was alive. "Papa," she gasped between sobs. "Papa, I'm sorry. I didn't want you to go alone." The last Papa went alone, and then he stopped talking, and he wouldn't look at me anymore, and I was so scared. The words cut deeper than any wind. The last Papa, the man I'd replaced. He'd given up, withdrawn from his family, from his people, from hope itself. And his daughter had watched it happen, had learned that when fathers went hunting alone, they came back as empty shells. So she followed me, because she was more afraid of losing me to despair than to death. I held her tighter. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." But over her shoulder, I saw movement. The wounded Galetolin had abandoned its patrol loop. Its massive form circled closer, head cocked, black eyes fixed on our position. The commotion had drawn it. The sounds of a child crying, of stone falling, of prey in distress. It smelled weakness, and it was coming. But something else was coming too. I felt it rising through my chest, flowing up from the stone beneath my hands, pouring into me from every direction at once. The hollow march. The territory's power surged through our bond, stronger now, clearer, more present than it had ever been. I wasn't just clinging to the land. The land was clinging to me, recognizing me, testing me. If I survived this, if I proved my dominion over beast and sky and the endless hunger of the wind, the people of this broken domain might finally see their true lord. My daughter's weight felt like nothing in my arms, and that terrified me more than the circling predator above. I moved fast through the rock formation, boots scraping against wind-polished stone, until I found it, a shallow alcove carved by centuries of howling currents. Natural shelter, hidden from above. It would have to do. "Papa, listen to me." I set Bakwa down against the back wall, her small body trembling against the cold rock. "Gomi stays with you. You stay hidden. You don't move. You don't make a sound, no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" The driftling pressed against her legs, ears pinned flat, lips pulled back from needle teeth. It understood the danger, even if it couldn't voice it. The creature's enhanced breath sense was screaming warnings. I could see it in the way its fur stood on end, the way its wing membranes flattened tight against its growing body. But what if? Promise me. Her enormous eyes, too large in her gaunt face, too old for 5 years of living, searched my expression. Whatever she found there made her nod, small fingers clutching Gomi's fur. "I promise, Papa." I kissed her forehead once. Then I turned and ran. The Galetolin's shadow swept across the formation like a curse, its massive wingspan blotting out the pale sky. I had minutes, maybe less. Every second I spent thinking was a second closer to those talons finding my daughter. The rock shelf appeared exactly where the territory bond told me it would. A flat expanse of weathered stone streaked with old blood and scattered with the bones of creatures unfortunate enough to cross this predator's hunting ground. This was where it landed, where it fed, where it felt safe, where I would trap it. My hands moved before conscious thought caught up, fingers finding the vine rope coiled at my belt, testing its strength, mapping anchor points across the stone. 100 traps built during survival streams flashed through my memory. Snares for rabbits, leg holds for larger game, tension triggers designed to fire at the slightest pressure. But this wasn't a rabbit. This was a beast that could carry off a grown man with one claw. The trap had to be perfect. I found a natural crack formation running through the shelf, deep enough to anchor weighted stones, positioned precisely where the beast would need a step to reach any bait. The hollow march's power thrummed through my connection to the territory. Weak still, uncertain, but present. I pressed my palms against the cold stone and pushed. The rock shifted. Not much. A subtle realignment of pressure points, a strengthening of the crack's interior walls, a firming of the anchor that would hold my weighted stones in place. The territory itself was responding to my will, lending its ancient strength to my desperate plan. I threaded vine rope through the improved anchor, tied knots my survival streamer hands remembered. But my conscious mind had never learned, positioned weighted stones at precise intervals to maximize the pulling force when triggered. The snare took shape, a simple leg hold design, but reinforced by lordly dominion, enhanced by the land's cooperation. The trigger point needed bait. I reached for my belt pouch with shaking hands, found the last scrap of dried meat I'd carried from the fortress. It was barely enough to feed a driftling, let alone attract a predator of this size. But the Galetolin was hungry, injured. Its patrol had been driven by need, as much as territoriality. Hunger made hunters careless. I placed the bait, adjusted the trigger tension one final time, then retreated to higher ground. The stone scraper in my hand felt pathetically small, a tool for processing carcasses, not killing them. But it was all I had. Above me, the Galetolin finished its final circling approach. It landed heavily on the rock shelf, massive talons scraping gouges in the stone, and I noticed immediately what the territory bond had already whispered. Its left wing sat at a wrong angle, the membrane torn, flight muscles strained. Injured. That was why its patrol had been erratic. It wasn't hunting at peak capacity. It was compensating, adapting, doing what all predators did when wounded, looking for easy prey. Its serpentine head swung toward the bait, nostrils flaring. One step forward. Two. Each impact sent tremors through the stone. Each breath expelled clouds of mist that stank of old blood and rotting meat. Its black eyes held no intelligence, only calculation, the simple mathematics of hunger versus caution. I stopped breathing. The Galetolin took a third step. The snare triggered with a sound like a whip crack, vine rope whipping around its scaled leg, weighted stones yanking with inhuman force. As the territory strengthened, anchors held firm. The beast lurched sideways, one leg swept out from under it, balance destroyed in a single catastrophic instant. It screamed. The sound was like tearing metal, a shriek of rage and confusion that echoed across the hollow march's broken landscape. The Galetolin thrashed against its bonds, wing arms beating uselessly, talons gouging stone, as it fought to right itself. For 3 seconds, I thought it would hold. Then I saw the talons begin to shred the vine rope. Fiber by fiber, the beast's desperate strength was overwhelming my trap. Its massive beak snapped toward the anchor point, ripping at the weighted stones, tearing free the careful engineering I'd built in minutes of frantic work. I had seconds before it broke loose completely. My eyes found the alcove where my daughter was hidden. I remembered her skeletal ribs pressing against my palm when I lifted her. Her eyes, too large, too haunted, too accepting of a world that had given her nothing but hunger and abandonment. The way she'd pressed that worn doll into my hands, trusting me to return. The toy still sat in my storage space, a promise I'd made to keep. The Galetolin's leg tore free another strand of vine. To claim the hollow march, to truly make it mine, I couldn't just manage the land. I had to conquer the beasts that plagued it, the predators that kept my people huddled in ruins, afraid to venture beyond crumbling walls, starving because they couldn't reach the resources scattered across their own territory. This beast had hunted my domain unchallenged for too long. I gripped my stone scraper, the weight of it, suddenly meaningful in my palm. Then I jumped down to the rock shelf and charged directly at a predator 3 times my size. There was no clever plan now. No traps, no strategy, no earth knowledge to guide my hands. Only a father's wrath, and a lord's absolute refusal to let his territory remain broken. The Galedolin's wings sliced through the air where my head had been a heartbeat before. Wind screamed past my ear. Not gentle wind. Concentrated force, a blade of compressed air that would have taken my head clean off my shoulders. I hit the stone shelf in a roll, feeling the impact jar through every bone, and the beast's shriek of frustrated rage echoed across the cliffs like thunder. It was faster than anything that injured had a right to be. The creature pivoted on its talons, massive body blocking out the gray sky, and I saw death in those golden eyes. Not the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey, pure fury. This beast had ruled these cliffs unchallenged for years. It had taken livestock, taken people, taken hope from every villager who'd ever looked up and seen its shadow cross the sun. And now some crawling thing had dared to trap it. The good wing swept down again. I threw myself sideways, felt the wind blade carve a groove into the stone where I'd been lying, and scrambled forward on hands and knees. Toward the beast, into the danger zone where its strikes would be harder to aim. Survival instinct screaming the whole way. The Galedolin's head snaked down, beak gaping wide enough to swallow me whole, and I rolled under its body. Darkness, warmth, the stink of predator musk, and old blood. My shoulder hit one of its massive legs, and I kept moving, stone scraper clutched in a death grip, until I found what I was looking for. The junction where injured wing met shoulder. The wound had reopened during its struggles against the vine trap. Dark blood matted the feathers there, and I could see the gap in the beast's natural armor where muscle and tendon lay exposed. It was trying to turn, try to reach me with beak or talon, but its own bulk worked against it on a narrow shelf. I drove the scraper into that wound with everything I had. The scream that tore from the Galedolin's throat wasn't a hunting cry. It was agony, pure animal agony. The beast thrashed sideways, and I felt the world tilt, as the entire shelf seemed to shake. Its injured wing collapsed completely, and the massive body followed, 2,000 pounds of predator crashing onto its side, pinning its own wing beneath it. I was already moving, up the heaving flank, over the ridge of feathers that ran along its spine. My hands found purchase in the thick plumage, sticky with blood, and I climbed like a man possessed. The beast was trying to right itself, talons scraping furrows in the stone. But the damaged wing wouldn't cooperate. It was trapped by its own body. The neck stretched long. As it tried to reach me with its beak, I reached the base of the skull first. Every hunting video I'd ever watched, every survival documentary, every piece of obscure knowledge I'd accumulated in another life, it all narrowed down to this moment. There was a pulse point on every creature with a circulatory system, a place where the major arteries lay close to the surface, where enough damage would end the fight regardless of how strong the opponent was. I found a soft gap between feathers, felt the rhythm of blood pumping beneath my palm. The stone scraper came down. Hot blood sprayed across my face, into my eyes, filling my mouth with copper. The Galedolin's body convulsed beneath me, a single massive spasm that nearly threw me clear, and then a second, weaker tremor. I held on, kept the scraper buried, twisted it. The beast went still. I sat there on the corpse of a sky predator, covered in blood from crown to chest, and laughed. The sound that came out of my throat was nothing sane, nothing composed. It was the laughter of a man who had just killed something impossible with a piece of sharpened stone, who had jumped off a cliff for a 5-year-old girl he'd known for 3 days, who was rapidly losing his grip on the division between Heronvale and a survival streamer who'd never actually survived anything this real. Papa. The voice cut through the hysteria like a blade. I turned. Bakwa was peeking out from the alcove where I'd left her, enormous eyes taking in the scene. The dead beast, her blood-soaked father, sitting on its neck. The silence where screaming predator rage had been moments before. Gomi pressed against her legs, the little sky pup's tail wagging uncertainly. My bloody face split into a smile. "It's okay, little one." I slid off the corpse, legs shaking so badly I nearly fell. Papa 1. The next hour was work. Practical work. The kind of work I understood in my bones, even when my hand was shaking and my mind kept trying to process what I just done. The stone scraper wasn't meant for butchering. But desperation is the mother of adaptation. I carved into the Galedolin's flesh with methodical patience, separating meat from bone, working around the toxic glands that Heron's muscle memory warned me about. And piece by piece, I packed it all away. The void storage responded to like an extension of my own body now. Open, deposit, close. Each chunk of meat vanishing into that dark space behind my consciousness where decay couldn't reach, where spoilage didn't exist. I felt the storage expand with each use, growing stronger. As my connection to the hollow march deepened, 20 pounds of meat, 30, 50. The Galedolin's talons went into storage, valuable trade goods, if I ever found merchants willing to deal with a cursed territory. Its feathers, those that weren't soaked in blood. The wing membranes that could be cured into lightweight leather. Even the bones went in, precious fuel that would burn hotter than anything else we could scavenge. By the time I finished, I was carrying nothing. Everything I'd harvested existed in that pocket dimension, weightless and preserved. My arms were free, my shoulders unburdened, and when I lifted Bakwa onto my neck for the journey home, she weighed almost nothing at all. The path back across the wind shears should have killed us. It didn't. I felt something strange. As we walked, a subtle awareness that hadn't been there before. The territory's defensive barriers were damaged, fractured in 100 places. But they weren't gone entirely. And, somehow, moving through my own domain with purpose, with the weight of a successful hunt behind me, those barriers responded. Wind gusts that should have thrown us off narrow bridges died to whispers. As we approached, footing that should have crumbled held firm beneath my boots. Territory attunement. The previous Heron had never developed it properly. Had never tried. But I was trying now, and the hollow march was responding. It wanted a lord who would fight for it. Sunli was waiting at the hut when we emerged from the cliff paths. She stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, too weak to have come searching, but too desperate to stay inside. Her face was pale, as bone, tears carved tracks down hollow cheeks. Then she saw us, saw Bakwa waving from my shoulders, giggling despite everything. Saw the blood covering me from head to toe, not my blood. Saw the way I walked now, straight-backed, unbowed. Her legs gave out. I caught her before she hit the ground, pulled her against my chest despite the gore, and held her. While she sobbed, Bakwa wiggled down to wrap her arms around both of us, and Gomi circled our ankles making worried noises. And for one long moment, we were just a family. Broken and starving and exiled to accursed territory. But alive. That night, we ate real meat for the first time in weeks. Sunli's hands remembered skills even starvation couldn't erase. She knew exactly how to prepare sky beast flesh, which cuts needed to be boiled to leach out toxins, which could be seared over the fire I'd fed with beast bone marrow. The hut filled with the smell of cooking meat, and I watched Bakwa's face. As she tasted it, wonder. Simple, uncomplicated wonder at having enough food to feel full. She fell asleep against my side afterward, her small fist clutching my shirt. Gomi curled at her feet in a protective ball. The fire had burned low. The wind outside whispered through the territory's broken barriers. And Sunli was watching me with eyes that saw too much. "You're different." The words were barely a whisper. She sat across from me, firelight dancing across features that hunger had carved too sharp, and there was no accusation in her voice. Only observation. Only the quiet recognition of a wife who knew her husband's soul, and knew that what looked back at her now wasn't quite the same man. Yes, I didn't insult her by lying. I'm different. What happened to you? The question hung between us. I could have told her the truth, that I wasn't really Heronvale, that his soul had been replaced by someone from another world, that everything she knew about her husband was now filtered through an alien consciousness wearing familiar skin. But what would that accomplish? I woke up, I said instead. I looked at our daughter starving. I looked at this territory, everything it could be, and I decided that I was done being weak. Sunli studied me for a long moment. Whatever she saw in my face, it was enough. All right, One word. Simple acceptance. She shifted closer, leaning against my free shoulder, and I felt the tension drain out of her body. I don't know who you are now, she murmured. But you fought for her. You hunt for us. You haven't looked at me with that disappointment, that disgust. I pulled them both closer, my daughter clutching my shirt in sleep, my wife pressing against my shoulder, both so fragile that the wrong pressure might break them. I will never let you starve again. The words came from somewhere deep, a promise written into the bones of this new existence. I will transform this cursed territory into a place people beg to live in. I will hunt every beast that threatens us, every predator that has made the Hollow March into a death sentence. I will track them down and make them into resources, into strength. Beyond the walls, I could feel it now. The vast territory sprawling in every direction, broken and hostile and entirely mine to command. Thousands of acres of neglected land, scattered villages full of exiles and criminals, and broken people who had been thrown away like garbage. My people, I will make the Hollow March into something that makes Woozing Vale choke on his own contempt. Sunli's breath caught at the name. She knew what it meant, that I wasn't just planning to survive. I was planning to rise, to become something that threatened the comfortable order of the Vale clan. But she didn't pull away. She pressed closer, and in her silence I heard acceptance. Partnership, the first true ally I'd found in this broken world. Across the Hollow March, in scattered huts and crumbling shelters, whispers had already begun to spread. Dacian the Scarred heard them from the eastern ruins. Their new lord had killed a Galetolin, alone, with a stone tool and bare hands. He dismissed it as fantasy until a hunter who'd found the corpse described the butchering cuts. Professional, methodical, someone who knew what they were doing. Old Myong heard them in his isolated workshop. The Lord hunts. The Lord provides. The Lord treated a cursed sky pup with medicine and let his daughter claim it. As a pet, the Lord was different. In a dozen villages scattered across the territory, starving exiles looked up from their empty bowls and wondered if the rumors could possibly be true. Their broken domain had been given to someone far more dangerous than anyone realized. A man with nothing left to lose. A survival instinct honed by another world. And the absolute conviction that he would transform this hell into a kingdom. Sleep took me that night with my family in my arms and plans crystallizing in my mind. Development priorities, resource management, beast hunting schedules, and citizen rehabilitation programs, and all the earth knowledge I could adapt to this impossible world. Tomorrow I would begin truly claiming the Hollow March. Tomorrow the real work started. But somewhere in the darkness, something else stirred. Deep beneath the territory's central fortress, a place I'd only seen from the outside, a crumbling ruin I hadn't yet dared to enter. The core crystal of the Hollow March pulsed with light it hadn't shown in 20 years. The territory had felt a lord's genuine will for the first time in decades. And it was waking up. Beneath it, sealed in a chamber no living soul remembered, something ancient opened its eyes. Not a beast, not a spirit, something older, something the previous lords had buried and forgotten, something that had been waiting for a ruler strong enough to find it. Its voice echoed through stone and crystal, heard by no one yet. Finally, it whispered into the dark, "A worthy vessel. Now we shall see if he survives the claiming, or if the Hollow March devours another pretender."